Arthur Pendleton didn't flinch when he heard the screaming through the radio. He turned the volume down. He picked up his pen, signed the airstrike authorization, and slid it across the table like a man approving a lunch order. 23 American operators were still alive in that building, transmitting, bleeding, waiting for extraction. He knew. He had personally ordered their signal jammed 17 minutes earlier. He looked at the CIA technician across the room and said, quietly, "Give the Admiral confirmation of no survivors." Then he straightened his collar and walked out. He believed every single one of them was about to die. He was wrong about one. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. The waiting room of Seattle Presbyterian Hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and Admiral Richard Sterling hated every second of it. He sat in one of those molded plastic chairs, the kind designed, he was fairly certain, to make a man feel small, with his hands folded in his lap and his jaw set like concrete. He was 61 years old. He had commanded destroyers in the Pacific. He had sat across the table from senators and secretaries of defense and never once blinked. And yet here he was, in a paper gown that crinkled every time he breathed, waiting to be told why he had passed out in the middle of a budget briefing 2 days ago. His aide, Lieutenant Commander Briggs, had practically dragged him here. Sterling had argued the whole way. He didn't argue anymore. Not out loud, anyway. A nurse stepped through the door with a clipboard in one hand and a blood pressure cuff in the other, and she didn't look up when she spoke. Her voice was calm, efficient, the voice of someone who had learned long ago to keep the world at arm's length. "Admiral Sterling, I'm Channing. I'll be taking your vitals before the doctor comes in." Sterling grunted something that was meant to be a greeting. She still hadn't looked at him. She set the clipboard on the counter, pulled a rolling stool close to the examination table, and sat down. Her movements were economical, nothing wasted. She reached for his arm with practiced ease, and that was when he saw her hands. Not soft, not the hands of a woman who had spent her career behind a nursing station. The knuckles were slightly enlarged on her right hand. Old fractures, healed wrong or healed fast without proper setting. There was a pale, horizontal scar at the base of her left index finger that curved with the kind of precision that only happened one way. A field suture, done in the dark, probably by the person wearing it. Sterling said nothing. He watched her wrap the blood pressure cuff around his arm with the same automatic attention he'd once given to radar screens. She pressed the stethoscope to the inside of his elbow, and that was when he saw it. The sleeve of her scrub top had shifted. Just an inch. Just enough. The scar started below the edge of the fabric and ran down toward her wrist in a pattern he recognized before his brain had time to form the word. Mottled. Silvery white at the center, fading to a pink red at the edges. Irregular but unmistakable to anyone who had seen it before. White phosphorus. The kind of burn that didn't come from an accident in a kitchen or a car fire. The kind that came from one very specific type of situation. The kind where someone was close enough to a WP grenade to have it land near them, and somehow, impossibly, alive to carry the scar home. His blood pressure reading beeped. 140/90, she said quietly. A little high. We'll keep an eye on it. She began unwrapping the cuff, and Sterling's hand moved before his mind made the decision. His fingers closed around her wrist, not hard, not rough, but firm enough that she stopped. She went very still. The kind of still that wasn't surprise, the kind that was training. Slowly she looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were gray, not soft gray, the kind of gray that had weathered something. Her face was composed in a way that was too composed, the stillness of a person who had learned to show nothing because showing something had once cost her everything. Sterling kept his voice low, controlled, the voice he used when he needed the room to understand that what he was saying was not a question. "Where did you get that scar?" "A beat. 2 beats. Cooking accident, she said, and she said it the way someone says something they've rehearsed 1,000 times. Easy, automatic, no hesitation. But her eyes didn't move, didn't flicker, didn't do the thing that eyes do when someone is lying, which is exactly what told him she wasn't an amateur. Sterling's grip didn't loosen. He turned her arm slightly, just enough to bring the scar into full view, and studied it the way he had studied maps of enemy coastlines. His jaw tightened. "That is not a cooking accident," he said. "That is a white phosphorus burn. And the spread pattern, 3 to 4 centimeters, elliptical, with secondary scarring consistent with debris impact, means you were not standing next to a grenade. You were close enough that it should have killed you." He paused. "Where did you serve?" The silence in that examination room was so complete that Sterling could hear the fluorescent light humming above them. She pulled her wrist back, gently, deliberately, the kind of motion that communicated, "I am choosing to let this happen, not that I cannot stop it." And she stood, set the clipboard on the counter, picked up her pen. "I'm going to need to ask you a few questions about your fainting episode," she said. "Can you describe what you experienced in the moments before you lost consciousness?" Sterling stared at her. "You're not going to answer me." "Admiral, I'm here to take care of your health. That's my job." "Who are you?" he said. The question came out differently than he intended. Not demanding, almost quiet. "I've seen that scar before. I've seen that exact pattern. Not many people in the world have that scar, and I knew most of them." He stopped. Something moved across his face. Not an emotion he showed easily, or perhaps ever. Something that looked, in the hard fluorescent light of that small room, like the very beginning of recognition. "Task Force Obsidian." Her pen stopped moving. Sterling's voice dropped to almost nothing. "That burn pattern, that exact spread, we documented it in the after-action report. The injuries consistent with WP exposure at the site." He was talking almost to himself now, working through it the way he worked through tactical problems, methodically, ruthlessly, following the logic wherever it led. 3 of our people had that type of scar. 2 of them died at the hospital in Ramstein. The third was... He stopped speaking. The room seemed to contract. He looked at her face again. He was good with faces. He had always been good with faces. But it had been 5 years, and she was different. Thinner through the jaw. Her hair was shorter. There was a line at the corner of her left eye that hadn't been there before. But the bones underneath were the same. "My God," he whispered. "Harding." She turned away from him and walked to the counter, keeping her back to him. "My name is Channing," she said. "Channing Moore. I've been a nurse at this hospital for 3 years. I grew up in Corpsman First Class Channing Harding." His voice was not a whisper anymore. "SEAL Team 8, Task Force Obsidian. You were the unit medic. You went missing after the airstrike. They declared you KIA." He paused. "I declared you KIA." She turned around then, and her face had changed. Not broken, not crumpled, not overcome, but the careful blankness was gone, replaced by something that had been living underneath it for a very long time. Her eyes were steady, and her voice was steady, and the thing behind both of them was not grief and not rage, but something older and colder than either. "Yes," she said, "you did." Sterling looked like a man who had just watched the floor open beneath him. "How?" He stopped, started again. "Harding, how are you alive?" "The building, we had confirmation. The entire structure came down. We had thermal imaging. There were no survivors. We ran secondary confirmation. There was nothing left." "There was me," she said simply. The weight of those 3 words landed in the room like something physical. Sterling opened his mouth and closed it again. He had been a naval officer for 35 years. He had delivered death notifications to families. He had stood in front of committees and explained losses that he had lived with every day since. And in this moment, in this small examination room, He looked like a man who did not know what to do with his hands. "How long?" he finally asked. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough." "Harding, my name is Channing Moore." "Damn it." The word came out rough, involuntary. "Damn it, you have to understand. We had no indication that anyone—" "I know what the report said." Her voice was quiet, flat, the kind of flat that had been hammered into shape over years. "I read it. I know exactly what the report said, and I know exactly who wrote it, and I know what was left out of it. So please don't tell me about your confirmation protocols and your thermal imaging. I was under 8 feet of rubble for 4 hours. I had a fractured collarbone and 3 broken ribs and a WP burn on my arm. And I crawled out through a drainage pipe that my team had noted as an emergency egress route in the pre-op briefing." Her jaw tightened. "The pre-op briefing that apparently no one reviewed before you called in the strike." Sterling went very still. "We were not dead when you called it in," she said. "We were pinned down. We were injured. We were waiting for extraction, and someone told you we were dead before we were dead." The fluorescent light hummed. "Who?" Sterling's voice had changed. The softness was gone. The guilt was gone, replaced by something that had been part of him for 3 decades. The cold, focused attention of a man who needed information. "Who told you someone gave us bad intelligence?" "Because I was there," she said. "I had comms for the first 40 minutes. I was transmitting our position, our status, our casualty count, and I was getting nothing back. No acknowledgement, no response, nothing. And then I heard the jets." She stopped, breathed. "They jammed our signal. Someone jammed our outgoing transmission before the strike. We were broadcasting into silence." Sterling's face had gone the color of old concrete. "That's not possible without someone very senior authorizing it," she finished. "Yes, I know." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sterling looked at her, really looked at her, and in his face was something that might have been the closest thing to devastation that a man like him was capable of showing. "I thought you were dead," he said. "All of you. I thought—" He stopped. There was a roughness in his voice that hadn't been there before. "I have thought about that mission every day for 5 years, every single day." "So have I," she said. And there was something in her voice then, not softness, not forgiveness, but something honest. Something that acknowledged that grief, at least, was something they shared, even if nothing else was. A knock at the door made them both tense. A physician's assistant poked her head in with a cheerful smile and a tablet. "Ready for the doctor in about 10 minutes, Admiral." "Channing, can I grab you for a sec?" Channing nodded. She looked at Sterling. Her eyes were steady. "I'll be right back," she said, and the words meant more than they appeared to. When the door closed, Sterling sat alone in the examination room, and for the first time in a very long time, Admiral Richard Sterling did not look like a man who was in command of anything. He looked like a man who had just realized he had been standing on the wrong side of a war he thought he'd already won. He had spent 5 years carrying the weight of Task Force Obsidian like a stone in his chest. The 23 names, the 23 faces, the 23 commendations he had written with his own hand for people he believed he had sent to their deaths. He had built a wall around it the way military men build walls around everything that threatens to take them under. He had made himself useful. He had moved forward. He had told himself that if the intelligence was wrong, if the mission had gone sideways, it was the price of war. It was the terrible arithmetic that commanders lived with and civilians could not understand. But the intelligence hadn't been wrong because of a mistake. Someone had done this on purpose. He looked at his own hands in his lap and thought about the moment he'd given the order, the weight of it, the certainty he'd had that it was the only call left to make. He had believed the report. He had believed the confirmation. He had trusted the man who brought him that intelligence the way he trusted the charts that told him where the reefs were. Arthur Pendleton. The name surfaced in his mind with an almost physical force. Deputy Director Pendleton had been the CIA liaison on Operation Obsidian Echo. He had been the one who confirmed the team's status. He had been the one who handed Sterling the satellite assessment that showed, or appeared to show, no survivors. He had been in the command center. He had been standing right next to Sterling when the order was given. Sterling had thanked him afterward. He had actually thanked the man for his support during a difficult operation. The door opened and Channing stepped back in, pulling it closed behind her. She moved to the counter and picked up her clipboard, but she wasn't looking at it. She was watching him with those steady, gray eyes, reading him the way a medic reads a patient, looking for the things that weren't being said. "You're thinking about who gave you the intelligence," she said. Sterling looked at her. Pendleton. Something shifted in her face. A tightening. Not surprise, she had known. She had known before she said it, and she had been waiting to see if he would get there on his own. "Yes," she said. "You have proof." "I have enough." Harding. He stood, and in the small room he was a large man, broad-shouldered, upright in a way that 5 years hadn't diminished, despite whatever damage time had done. "If you've been sitting on this for 5 years, if you've been living under a false identity instead of what?" she asked, and her voice was even, but her eyes were not. "Instead of going to the Navy? To the same institution that employs Arthur Pendleton's best friends? To the same oversight committee that Pendleton testified in front of 3 months ago and received a commendation from?" She shook her head. "I spent the first year trying to find someone I could trust. I couldn't find one. And then I decided the only move I had left was to disappear until I had everything I needed." "And do you?" he said. "Do you have everything you need?" She was quiet for a moment. "Almost," she said. Sterling studied her. "What's missing?" She met his eyes, and in the silence between them, something passed. Not trust, not yet. Trust was not something either of them had in abundance anymore, but something like the recognition of shared necessity. Two people who had been maneuvered into the same corner by the same man 5 years apart. Someone with enough rank that when the evidence is presented, it can't be buried, she said. Someone who has reason to want the truth as badly as I do. Someone who was in that command center when the order was given and can testify to what they saw. She paused. Someone who can walk into a room and not be dismissed. Sterling held her gaze for a long moment. "You've been waiting for me," he said slowly. Not an accusation, just the shape of the thing, settling into place. "I've been waiting for the right moment," she said carefully. "I didn't know it would be here. I didn't know it would be you walking through that door." And something in her voice told him that this, at least, was true. She hadn't engineered this. She hadn't set a trap. The universe had simply, after 5 years of silence, put the one man in the world who could help her in a paper gown in her examination room. But here we are. Sterling was quiet. He was the kind of man who thought before he spoke, who had always been the kind of man who thought before he spoke. And he was thinking now, hard and fast, running scenarios the way he'd run battle plans, testing the edges of the thing for weaknesses. "Pendleton has been promoted twice since Obsidian Echo," he said. "He has allies on the Hill. He has a security clearance that puts him in rooms where records can disappear." His eyes narrowed. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "Communications logs," she said. "Pre-strike. I have the original timestamps from my gear, the device I was carrying when I was transmitting. I pulled it out of the rubble. It shows the outgoing signal and the moment it was jammed, the exact frequency, the exact source signature." She paused. "And it matches the jamming equipment assigned to the CIA forward unit that Pendleton was running." The air in the room seemed to change. "That kind of evidence," Sterling said carefully, "would need to be authenticated by someone with the technical expertise to—" "I have that too," she said. He looked at her for a long time. "You've been building this case alone." "My whole team is dead," she said. "Yes, alone. There were 23 names on the wall of a building in Washington, D.C. that Sterling had personally attended the dedication of. He had stood in front of those names and said words about sacrifice and valor and the debt that the living owed to those who gave everything. And as he stood in this hospital room, something in his chest was cracking along an old fracture line. The line that had been there for 5 years, invisible, unbearable, and unmistakably real. He straightened, and when Admiral Richard Sterling straightened, it was not a physical thing alone. It was a shift in the entire disposition of the man, the settling of a decision that, once made, would not be unmade. "Tell me everything," he said. She looked at him, measured him one last time, and then she pulled a chair close to the examination table and sat down. And for the first time since she had walked into that room, Channing Harding allowed herself to breathe. Outside in the hallway, the hospital moved around them the way water moves around stone. Nurses with carts, visitors with flowers, the ordinary machinery of ordinary life. And in the examination room at the end of the second-floor corridor, two people who had both been betrayed by the same man and both survived what was meant to kill them sat across from each other in the fluorescent light and began to figure out how to finish what Arthur Pendleton had started. Neither of them knew that Pendleton already knew Sterling was in Seattle. Neither of them knew that a man had been watching the hospital entrance since 7 that morning, and neither of them knew that the conversation they were having had already been flagged by a system that should not have known to flag it. The door to Channing's locker, 3 floors down, had been opened 4 minutes ago, and the small thumb drive she kept taped to the inside panel, the one with the communications logs, the one she had protected for 5 years, was gone. The thumb drive was gone. Channing knew it the way a soldier knows when the air changes before an ambush. Not a thought, not a conclusion, but a physical certainty that moved through her body before her mind had time to catch up. She had excused herself from the examination room under the pretense of checking on another patient, taken the stairs to the basement level, and now she stood in front of her open locker with her hand pressed flat against the inside panel where the tape had been. The adhesive was still there, fresh, peeled away clean, not torn, which meant whoever took it had known exactly what they were looking for and exactly where it was. Her heart rate didn't spike. That was the training. 5 years of living like a ghost had layered new instincts over the old ones, and her body's first response to danger was not panic, but a cold, crystalline calm that let her think. She counted backward from 5. She looked at the locker without touching anything else. She thought about who had access to this floor, this room, this building in the last 4 hours. Then she thought about the fact that Sterling had just walked through the front door of Seattle Presbyterian Hospital, and someone had known he would be here today. She closed the locker. She took the stairs back up, not the elevator. When she pushed open the door to the examination room, Sterling looked up immediately, and he read her face the way a man reads weather. Quickly, with the understanding that what he saw was going to require a response. "What happened?" he said. "They already know," she said. She kept her voice low and even, and she did not sit down. "Someone accessed my locker in the last 2 hours. The drive is gone." Sterling was on his feet before she finished the sentence. "How long ago did you?" "I don't know exactly. I checked it this morning at 6:45. It was there." She looked at him. "You were admitted through the main entrance at 9:10. If they had someone watching for you, they had enough time to make a call, get someone in here, and pull it before I even walked into this room." Sterling's jaw was working. The drive, was it the only copy? Of the original device logs, yes. I have partial records backed up elsewhere, but the timestamp authentication, the chain of evidence, that was on the drive. She stopped. "Without it, I have testimony and circumstantial documents, which a man with Pendleton's resources can dismantle in an afternoon." Sterling put his hands on his hips and looked at the floor, and she could see him doing what commanders do, recalibrating, stripping away what was lost and assessing what remained. It was a familiar posture. She had seen it in every officer she had ever served under in a crisis, and she had either respected it or feared it, depending on the man. With Sterling, in this moment, she was still deciding.
Could they have accessed it remotely?
He asked. The backup. No, it's not networked, she paused. But they don't know that. He looked up. Meaning? Meaning whoever took the drive will report back that they have it. They'll assume that eliminates my evidence. That gives us a window, small but real, where they think they've neutralized the threat and we can move before they close it. Sterling studied her. Something in his expression shifted. The assessment of an officer recognizing capability in an unexpected place. You've thought about this scenario, he said. I've thought about every scenario, she said. For 5 years, I've had nothing else to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need from me right now, in the next hour? And that was the question that mattered. Not what had been lost, not how bad the situation was. What do you need right now? Channing had been alone for so long that the question almost caught her off guard. Almost. Your clearance, she said, and your phone, not your personal cell. Whatever secure line you have access to that Pendleton's network can't monitor. Sterling reached into the jacket hanging on the back of the chair and pulled out a second phone, matte black, government issue, and held it out. My aide Briggs has a secure terminal in the vehicle downstairs. Military-grade encryption. Pendleton has no visibility into Navy internal comms on that channel unless he's gone through SECNAV, which would leave a paper trail. Channing took the phone. Her fingers moved across it with a fluency that was not a nurse's fluency. It was the practiced ease of someone who had spent years working with military hardware, and Sterling noticed it but said nothing. I need you to authorize a records pull, she said without looking up. Specifically, the communication logs from the CIA Forward Coordination Unit, Pendleton's unit, for the 72-hour window surrounding Operation Obsidian Echo. Those logs were classified above my access level, but not above yours. If I request those records, Pendleton will know within the hour. Yes, she said, which is why you're not going to request them officially. She handed the phone back. You're going to call someone you trust inside DIA who owes you a favor, and you're going to ask them to pull it informally off the official request system and have it sent to a non-Navy email address that Pendleton has no reason to monitor. Sterling looked at her for a long moment. You want me to run a back-channel intelligence operation from a hospital room in Seattle. I want you to do what needs to be done, she said simply. The silence stretched between them, and then Sterling made a sound that was not quite a laugh, too dark for that, too compressed, and he pulled out the phone and started dialing. While he spoke in low, clipped sentences to whoever was on the other end, Channing moved to the window. She kept to the side of the frame, not directly in front of the glass, and looked down at the street below. Her eyes moved systematically, left to right, near to far, the way she'd been taught to scan a perimeter. A parked silver sedan 2 blocks north that had been there when she arrived this morning. A man in a gray jacket near the hospital entrance, who had been there when she glanced out on her way down to the locker room and was still there now, not moving, not looking at his phone, not doing anything that ordinary people waiting outside a hospital do. He was watching the entrance. He wasn't even trying to look like he wasn't. Sterling, she said quietly. He ended his call. DIA contact is pulling the records. It'll take 40 minutes. He crossed to her. She didn't point. She just angled her head slightly, and a man who had spent a career reading tactical situations understood. He looked. He saw the man in the gray jacket. He said nothing for 3 seconds. That's not a coincidence, he said. No. Exit options. Service entrance, east side of the building, connects to a loading corridor. I know where it lets out. She turned away from the window. But we're not leaving yet. He looked at her sharply. If we run now, we're reactive, she said. We're operating in their tempo. I've been reactive for 5 years and it hasn't worked. Something hardened in her voice. Not anger, not exactly, but the kind of conviction that had been tested until it couldn't be bent anymore. We have 40 minutes while your contact pulls those records.
I'm going to use them.
To do what? I have a colleague in this hospital, she said. Dr. Marcus Webb. He doesn't know my real name. He doesn't know anything about my past. But 3 weeks ago he came to me because he was worried about a patient. A federal contractor who came in with injuries he said were from a car accident, but that Webb recognized as consistent with an enhanced interrogation technique. She paused. The contractor was one of Pendleton's. Sterling went very still. Webb photographed the injuries before the man was transferred. He gave me a copy because he didn't know what to do with it, and he trusted me. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. The weight of the things she was describing, the reality of what Pendleton was. I need to get that photograph before we leave this building. Because without the drive, it's the most concrete evidence I have that Pendleton is still running operations that are not sanctioned, not legal, and not survivable for the people he uses. Sterling was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, this contractor, do you have a name? Webb has a name. I have a face. She moved toward the door. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Harding! His voice stopped her. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not authority, not assessment, something more complicated. I need you to understand something. What I'm about to help you do, what we're building here, it doesn't matter that I outrank you, or that I have clearances you don't. When this is over, when whatever we're walking into is done, I want you to know that I understand what was taken from you. From all of you. His voice roughened slightly. I can't give it back, but I intend to make sure someone answers for it. Channing looked at him for a long moment. Then stay by that phone, she said, and she left. The corridor outside was busy, the way hospital corridors are always busy. Movement and noise, and the particular controlled urgency of medical professionals who never quite run, but never quite walk either. Channing moved through it with her head up and her pace steady. Just another nurse on her rounds, invisible in the way that people are invisible when they look like they belong. Dr. Marcus Webb's office was on the 4th floor, tucked behind the radiology suite. She took the back stairwell, pushed through the fire door, and knocked twice, then once, the pattern he recognized as her. The door opened. Webb was 44, built like a former college athlete who had traded the gym for long hours and bad cafeteria food. And he had the particular brand of tired that accumulated in people who cared too much about their work. He looked at her face when she came in, and he recognized immediately that something was different. Channing, what's... The photograph you gave me, she said. The contractor. I need the original file, the one on your personal drive. He blinked. I thought you said to sit on it until... Things changed. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. I need it now, Marcus. I need it, and then I need you to go home sick today. Not in an hour. Right now. He stared at her. You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. And she was. The apology was real, visible in her face in a way that most of what she felt was not. I cannot explain everything right now, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Webb held her gaze for a moment. He was a perceptive man. It was part of what made him a good diagnostician. And he was reading her the way he read patients, looking past the surface for what the numbers actually said. Whatever he found, it was enough. He turned to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a small external hard drive, and plugged it into his laptop. His hands moved through a few screens. A print prompt. The laser printer on the shelf behind him hummed to life and produced 2 pages. He handed them to her along with a USB stick. Original file is on there, he said. The print is a secondary. He paused. Channing, are you in danger? She folded the pages and put them in the pocket of her scrub top. Go home, Marcus. Don't use your work email today. Don't call anyone from this hospital. She put her hand briefly on his arm, the kind of contact that meant something without saying it. Thank you. She was back in the stairwell before he could respond. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, she was back in the examination room. Sterling was on the phone again, standing with his back to the door and his voice tight. He turned when she came in and held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. And she nodded and stood by the window and checked the street again. The man in the gray jacket had moved. He was closer now, still watching the entrance but repositioned to cover the side street as well. They were tightening the net. Sterling ended the call. The DIA pull came back faster than expected, he said, and his voice carried something she hadn't heard in it yet. Not urgency, shock. The particular shock of a man who believed he understood the scope of a thing and has just learned he was catastrophically wrong about the size of it. The communication logs from Pendleton's unit, they're not just from Obsidian Echo. She waited. There are 6 other operations in the same window, he said. Same pattern. Jammed outgoing transmissions. Falsified confirmation reports. 6 other operations where the official record shows all or mostly KIA outcomes, and the timeline of the jams matches the CIA forward unit's equipment signatures. He looked at her. Channing, he didn't just do this to your team. The room seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. How many? She said. In 5 years? The logs show activity consistent with this pattern across 6 confirmed operations, and at least 4 more flagged as anomalous. He was gripping the phone hard enough that his knuckles were pale. We could be talking about more than 100 people. Channing sat down. It was the first time she had sat down since walking back into that room, and the motion was not weakness. It was the body's involuntary response to the recalibration of a world. She had spent 5 years believing that what happened to Task Force Obsidian was singular. A specific betrayal, specific enough to name, specific enough to bring down with the right evidence. And now the ground beneath that belief was shifting, expanding into something larger and darker and far more terrible than one dead team on one bad night. He's been running this as a program, she said. It wasn't a question. It looks that way. Sterling's voice was controlled, but she could hear the strain underneath it. The thing he was holding back. Eliminating assets he could no longer control or who knew too much. Using sanctioned military operations as cover. Having them walk into situations where the outcome could be managed. He set the phone down on the counter. The intelligence he fed us for Obsidian Echo, the reason I gave the order, it wasn't incompetence or bad sources. It was manufactured. He built it from the ground up, specifically to produce that outcome. Channing looked at her hands. They were steady. She noted this with a kind of detached appreciation for the body's capacity to hold things that the mind could not yet process. Then the evidence we're building isn't just about my team anymore, she said. No, Sterling said. It's not. She stood. The steadiness moved from her hands into the rest of her, and when she spoke again, her voice was different. Not harder, but more certain, like a frequency that had found its true pitch after years of interference. Which means Pendleton cannot afford to let either of us walk out of this hospital if he believes we have what we have. That man on the street, he's not here to surveil us. He's here to make sure we don't leave. Sterling looked at her. Then we need to leave in a way they don't expect. Yes. She moved to the door, checked the corridor through the narrow window, turned back. I need you to do something that is going to go against every instinct you have as a flag officer. He crossed his arms. Tell me. I need you to leave your aide behind. Sterling's expression said exactly what she expected it to say. Briggs doesn't know what's happening, she said quickly. He's a good officer and he's loyal to you, and that is exactly why he is a liability right now. If he's with us, he's a target and he's a leash. Pendleton's people will use him to control your movements. If he thinks you're still in this building finishing a medical appointment, we buy time. She held his gaze. You go with me, now, Through the service exit, with what we have. Sterling was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Where are we going? I have a car 2 blocks from here, she said, not registered to Channing Moore. And I have a place that nobody, not Pendleton, not his people, not anyone in the intelligence community, knows exists, because I built it in a name that died under 8 feet of rubble 5 years ago. She paused, and from there, we make the call that ends this. Sterling looked at her, this woman who was supposed to be dead, who had spent 5 years in the shadows building a case with her bare hands, who had just handed him evidence that could shake the intelligence community to its foundation. And he made a decision that he knew, clearly and without ambiguity, would change the rest of his life. Lead the way, he said. They moved into the corridor together, and the hospital flowed around them, indifferent and ordinary, and neither of them looked back. On the street below, the man in the gray jacket received a text message. He read it. He looked up at the building. He typed back 3 words and started moving toward the entrance. Upstairs on the 3rd floor, a nurse named Channing Moore and an Admiral who had once signed her death certificate were already gone. The service exit let them out into a narrow side street that smelled like rain and diesel, and Channing moved without hesitation. Left, then left again, cutting through the gap between 2 buildings with the sureness of someone who had walked this route in her head 100 times before ever needing to use it. Sterling kept pace behind her, his paper gown traded back for his uniform jacket, his face carrying the particular blankness of a man who had put everything else aside and was operating on a single frequency. Get out, get clear, think later. She had been right about the car. It was a 10-year-old gray Honda, unremarkable to the point of invisibility, parked on a residential street 2 blocks from the hospital behind a florist's delivery van. She unlocked it with a key from her scrub pocket, and they were moving before Sterling had fully closed his door. Where are we going? He said. Not a question, a request for information that his mind needed in order to function. South of the city, 40 minutes. She checked the rearview mirror. The street behind them was empty. She checked it again 30 seconds later. Still empty. She pulled onto a main road and joined the flow of ordinary traffic and let herself take the first full breath she'd taken in the last 20 minutes. I need you to turn off your phone. My secure line? Both of them. I know that feels wrong. Do it anyway. She glanced at him. If they're running active location tracking on your devices, and if they know you're in Seattle, they are, then every second those phones are on, we're a moving dot on someone's screen. Sterling looked at the phones in his hands. She could see him working through the implications, running the calculation between the loss of his communication capability and the alternative. He turned them both off and put them in the glove compartment. The records your DIA contact pulled, she said. Did he send them to a clean address? He sent them to a personal account he's had since 2003. Nothing government, nothing connected to his current assignment. Sterling paused. He's a good man. He won't talk. He may not have a choice, she said, and she said it as gently as she could, which was still plainly and directly. If Pendleton's people are monitoring my hospital access logs, and they pull the timing of your admission, and they connect this morning to the records pool, they will identify your contact within 48 hours. She kept her eyes on the road. He needs to know that. Sterling was quiet. She could feel the weight of that settling onto him. The recognition that the people adjacent to him were no longer safe simply by virtue of their distance. I'll warn him, he said, when we get where we're going, not before. He nodded once, and then, after a moment, his voice came back lower and more careful than before. The voice of a man asking something he needed to ask, but wasn't sure he had the right to. Harding, in the 5 years you've been building this, has anyone else, anyone who knew or got close to knowing, has anyone been hurt because of it? Channing's hands tightened on the wheel by a fraction. One, she said, a woman named Teresa Garza. She was a JAG paralegal I reached out to in year 2. I was careful. I thought I was careful enough. She stopped, started again. She was in a car accident 8 months after I contacted her. The official ruling was driver error. Her voice was even, precise, stripped of everything except the facts, which was the only way she could say it at all. She survived. She has a spinal injury. She doesn't know why it happened. She can never know why it happened. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people sitting with a hard truth that didn't need commentary. I stopped reaching out to people after that, she said. Sterling said nothing for a moment. Then, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, she said. Be useful. It came out harder than she intended. He didn't flinch from it. Fair enough, he said. They drove. The city thinned around them. Commercial streets giving way to quieter neighborhoods. Then to the long stretches of highway that opened up south of Seattle. The sky gray and low overhead. Channing checked the rearview mirror at regular intervals, not obsessively, but with the steady rhythm of a habit that had become involuntary. Around the 20-minute mark, Sterling spoke. The 6 other operations in the DIA logs. Did any names come up? Unit designations? Team identifiers? Your contact didn't include names in the initial pull. He flagged the pattern. The full personnel records would require a separate pull, one that would need a more senior authorization, or more time, or both. He turned to look at her profile. But if there are survivors from those other operations, if Pendleton ran the same play 6 more times, and even one other person came out the other side, then we're not alone, she said. She had thought of this already. She had thought of it the moment the number had come out of Sterling's mouth, standing in the examination room while the floor was tilting. She had thought of it, and it had opened something in her that she had kept shut for 5 years. Something that felt dangerously like hope, and she was not ready to trust it yet. I know, one thing at a time. He accepted that. She was grateful he accepted that. The safe house was not what Sterling expected, and his face showed it even as he kept his expression controlled. It was a small, owned, not rented property. She had explained nothing about how she'd acquired it, and he hadn't asked. Set back from a 2-lane road, ordinary in every visible way. She pulled the Honda into the detached garage and killed the engine. Inside, it was spare and functional. No photographs, no personal objects. A laptop on a table, a portable router on the shelf beside it, a metal lockbox in the kitchen cabinet that she opened with a key from her keychain and checked before she did anything else. The contents, a second USB, a sealed envelope, a burner phone, were undisturbed. Sit down, she said, and her tone was not unkind, but it was the tone of someone who was now on her own ground and was going to run this the way she needed to run it. Sterling sat. She put the burner phone on the table in front of him. You can use this to reach your DIA contact. Tell him what I told you. Tell him to go dark for 72 hours. Sterling picked up the phone and dialed from memory. The call was short, clipped, and clearly not the first difficult conversation the man on the other end had received in his career. When Sterling set the phone down, his expression was grim. He says there was an access alert on the records pull. Someone inside the system flagged it within 20 minutes of him sending to the clean address. Channing looked up from the laptop where she was already working. 20 minutes. He wiped the account. He says he's clean. He's not clean, she said quietly, but there's nothing we can do about that right now. She turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a document. Not the communications logs, those were gone, but a secondary record, less technically definitive but coherent and clear. A timeline she had built by hand over 5 years, cross-referencing public records, declassified fragments, and her own memory, each entry dated and sourced. Sterling leaned forward and started reading, and she watched his face as he did. She watched the moment he reached the section covering the 72 hours before Operation Obsidian Echo, the intelligence briefings, the source attributions, the names attached to each piece of analysis. She watched his jaw set. He briefed me personally 3 times in the 48 hours before the operation, Sterling said, without looking up. Every piece of intelligence that justified the mission parameters came through him or was corroborated by him. He stopped reading. He looked at her. I asked him twice about source reliability. He told me the sources were beyond question. They were his sources, she said. He built them. He controlled them. He was selling you a story that had one predetermined ending. She paused. The target location, the compound we were sent to. Do you know what was actually there? Sterling's expression told her he did not. Nothing, she said. I had eyes on that building for 11 minutes before the op went sideways. There was no high-value target. There was no weapons cache. There was a communications relay, a routing node for signals traffic. That's it. She let him sit with that for a moment. We were not sent to eliminate a threat. We were sent to eliminate a team that had gotten too close to something Pendleton needed to stay buried. The quiet in the room was dense. What had your team found? Sterling asked. This was the question she had been carrying longest. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out the folded pages Webb had printed, the contractor photographs, and she set them on the table. But she didn't open them yet. She looked at Sterling directly. 18 months before Obsidian Echo, our team was running recon support for a CIA extraction in northern Syria. We weren't the primary unit. We were there to cover egress routes. She folded her hands on the table. During that operation, 2 of my team members intercepted a data transfer at a relay point. They weren't supposed to. They were in the wrong position because a GPS coordinate in our briefing packet had been transcribed with a 1-digit error. She let out a slow breath. The data they intercepted included financial routing records, transfers between a shell account and a private intelligence contractor. The amounts were significant. The timing corresponded exactly with a compromise of 3 separate CIA field networks in the preceding 18 months. Networks that had gone dark in ways that got people killed. Sterling was completely still. They noted it, she said. They logged it in their op report. They didn't understand what it meant, not fully, not then, but they logged it, and that log went into the system, and somewhere upstream, someone read it. She unfolded the pages from her pocket. The contractor in Dr. Webb's photograph. His name is Carl Renner. He was the financial officer for the shell company that received those transfers. He left CIA employ 2 years ago and has been working private sector since. She turned the pages toward Sterling. He came into Seattle Presbyterian 4 weeks ago with injuries Webb identified as consistent with forced interrogation. He told Webb he'd been in a car accident. She paused. He was scared. Webb said he'd never seen a patient that frightened. He discharged himself against medical advice after 18 hours. Sterling looked at the photographs. His face was controlled in the way that a man's face is controlled when he is using every resource he has to stay operational and not give in to the fury building underneath. Pendleton is cleaning house, he said. Anyone with financial knowledge of the transfers, anyone who might talk. He's been doing it for years, she said. My team was the first major operation, but it didn't stop there. It never stopped. She stood, walked to the window without looking out of it. He is not just corrupt, he is systematic. He has been running a parallel program inside the CIA for at least 7 years, eliminating liabilities, protecting financial networks that I believe are connected to foreign intelligence interests, and using sanctioned American military operations as both the cover mechanism and the cleanup tool. She turned back. And he has never once faced any consequence because the people who could bring consequences, people with rank, with access, with standing, either don't know or don't survive long enough to act. Sterling stood. He was the tallest thing in the room, and when he stood, it was with the full weight of what he was. I have standing, he said. I know. I have a relationship with the Inspector General of the intelligence community that goes back 20 years. Outside Pendleton's sphere, independent oversight. His voice was building now, not in volume but in intensity, the way a fire builds, quietly, from the inside out. And I have something Pendleton has never had to account for. A sitting flag officer willing to go on record, testify under oath, and put his entire career against the outcome. Channing looked at him. You understand what that means, for you personally. Yes. It means you're a target the moment you move. I've been a target before. Not like this, she held his gaze. The people who come for you won't be enemies you can identify. They'll look like your staff. They'll look like your security. They'll look like a bad cardiac event or a car accident or a suicide note that nobody saw coming. Sterling met her eyes without flinching. Is that what happened to someone you tried to protect? The question landed exactly where it was aimed. She didn't look away. Yes, she said. He nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man accepting the terms of something he is choosing to enter anyway. Then we move fast enough that he doesn't have time to set it up. She almost said something, stopped. And then, because it needed to be said, and she was not a person who left necessary things unsaid, even when they were difficult. Why? She asked. You could walk away from this. Your career, your reputation, they're intact. You didn't know what Pendleton was doing. No one would hold you responsible. You could get in a car right now and go back to being Richard Sterling, flag officer, and nobody could touch you for it. The question hung in the air between them. Sterling looked at her for a long moment, and in his face was something she hadn't expected to find. Not the military calculus she'd anticipated, not the institutional loyalty, not even the simple human response of a guilty conscience needing absolution. What was in his face was older and plainer than any of that. Because I signed the order, he said. I signed it, and 22 people died. And you crawled out through a drainage pipe and spent 5 years alone building a case that I should have been building 3 months after it happened, if I had asked one more question. His voice didn't break. It went rougher, had quieter, but it didn't break. I cannot undo what I signed, but I can make sure it meant something. That's not guilt. That's just the only way I know how to live with it. The room was very quiet. Then Channing's head turned sharply toward the front of the house, and Sterling saw it, the shift in her body language from still to taut, like a wire pulled to its tension point. He heard it half a second after she did. A vehicle on the road outside, moving slowly, slower than passing traffic. The sound of it pausing, not stopping, pausing, the way a vehicle pauses when a driver is checking an address. Back bedroom, she said, low and immediate. There's a window that opens onto the east side. If I say go, you go. Don't wait for me. Don't argue. You go and you keep moving east until you hit the next road, and you flag down the first civilian vehicle you see. I'm not leaving you. Admiral. Her voice was flat and quiet and absolutely final. You are the evidence. Your testimony, your rank, your access to those DIA records. That is the case. I have spent 5 years building to this moment, and I will not let it end in this room because you have a problem following orders. Her gray eyes were steady. If something goes wrong, you are the one who has to finish this. Not me, you. Do you understand? Sterling looked at her, and she could see the thing fighting in him, the instinct, the pride, the 35 years of being the person who did not leave, and she saw him beat it back with the same discipline that had made him an admiral. I understand, he said. The vehicle outside slowed again, stopped. Channing moved to the kitchen cabinet. She opened it and reached behind the lockbox, and when her hand came back, it was holding something small and flat that she transferred to her right front pocket in one smooth motion. She looked back at Sterling. Back bedroom, now. Don't open the window until you hear something you shouldn't be hearing. Her voice was even. With any luck, this is a lost delivery driver. Sterling moved. He was in the back corridor when he heard the knock at the front door. 3 times, evenly spaced, the knock of someone who was not worried about whether they had the right address. He stood in the dark of the back corridor and listened to Channing's footsteps across the front room. Heard the door open, heard a voice, male, flat, professionally neutral, say, "Channing Moore?" And heard her say, "That's me." And then heard the voice say, "We have your colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb. He's asking for you." Sterling's hand found the doorframe in the dark and held it. There was a pause, 2 seconds, 3, and then Channing's voice came back, and it was the most controlled thing Sterling had ever heard a human being produce. Calm and open and giving away absolutely nothing. "Is he all right?" she said. "He's fine," the voice said. "He's asking for you to come with us." Another pause. Sterling could hear his own heartbeat. "Of course," she said.
Just let me get my jacket.
And in the space of those 4 words, in the small, ordinary breath she put between get and my, Sterling understood exactly what she was telling him. Not instructions, not a code, just the truth, plainly delivered in the only way she could deliver it without the man at the door understanding it. She was going with them. She was going to protect Webb by going with them, and she was leaving Sterling behind to finish what they had started together. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He heard the front door close. He heard the vehicle outside start and pull away. He stood in the dark for 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes, and then he straightened, and he turned, and he opened the window. The cold air hit his face, and he climbed through it without hesitation, because an admiral who had been told to follow orders had decided, for the first time in his career, that the order he had been given was the one that actually mattered. On the table inside, the laptop was still open. The timeline document was still on the screen. And next to the laptop, held down by the burner phone, was a single folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before they heard the car. She had written it before the knock. She had known. She had been ready for this exact moment, had planned for it the way she had planned for every scenario, because 5 years of surviving alone teaches a person to prepare for the thing they most hope won't happen. Sterling reached back through the window and picked it up, unfolded it. 4 lines, a name, an address, a time. And at the bottom, in handwriting that was small and precise and utterly without sentiment, "Don't be late." The note had 4 lines. Sterling read them twice, memorized them, and put the paper in his jacket pocket. Then he moved. He had no phone, no weapon, no vehicle, and no aid. What he had was 35 years of institutional knowledge, a name that still opened doors in certain rooms, and the handwriting of a woman who had planned for her own capture and still found a way to leave him a path forward. He was going to use all 3. The road east was a 2-lane county road, quiet at this hour, the kind of road where a man in a Navy uniform walking on the shoulder was conspicuous enough that the third vehicle to pass him slowed and pulled over without being flagged. The driver was a retired school teacher named Gerald, who had a dashboard covered in grandchildren's photographs and who asked no questions beyond whether Sterling needed to get somewhere important. Sterling said yes. Gerald drove. 41 minutes later, Sterling was standing at the front desk of the Marriott on 4th Avenue in downtown Seattle, asking the concierge for a house phone, and the name he gave to be connected to was not a room number, but a full name. Rear Admiral James Calloway, USN retired. And the concierge made the call without hesitation because the man asking for it was wearing 4 stars and the expression of someone for whom inconvenience was not a concept he recognized. Calloway picked up on the second ring. "It's Sterling," Sterling said. "I need 20 minutes and I need them now." A pause. Then, "Room 714, come up." James Calloway was 67 years old and had left active service 4 years earlier with his reputation intact and his conscience largely clear, which was a rarer combination than it should have been. He and Sterling had served together twice in their careers, once in the Gulf and once in a joint command structure that had required both of them to spend 6 months pretending to agree with people they fundamentally didn't. They trusted each other in the way that military men trust each other after shared difficulty. Not blindly, but with the particular depth that comes from having seen how a person behaves when things go badly. When Sterling came through the door, Calloway took one look at him. No aid, no phones, the carefully controlled expression that Sterling wore when something had gone past serious into something else entirely. And he closed the door and said, "How bad?" "Sit down," Sterling said, "and understand that what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room until I tell you it can." Calloway sat. Sterling stood because he needed to move while he talked, and he told him, "Not everything, not yet, not all of it, but the shape of it, the architecture, Pendleton, the jammed transmissions, the 6 operations, the survivor he had found alive in a hospital room that morning, and the evidence she had built over 5 years, and the fact that she was now in the hands of Pendleton's people because she had traded herself to protect a civilian doctor who had been used as leverage." Calloway listened without interrupting. He was the kind of man who listened completely before he spoke, and Sterling had always valued that about him, and he valued it now more than ever. When Sterling finished, Calloway was quiet for nearly 10 seconds. "You believe her," he said finally. "Not a challenge, a check." "I've been interrogating people for 35 years, Sterling said. "I know when someone is running a play and when someone is telling the truth. She has been telling the truth since the moment I saw that scar." He paused. "She also saved my life this morning by getting me out of that building before Pendleton's people locked it down. And she did it knowing it would accelerate her own exposure. That's not a woman running a play." Calloway nodded slowly. "The ICIG you mentioned." "Margaret Forsyth," Sterling said. "She and I have known each other since she was an assistant U.S. attorney. She is outside Pendleton's network. She is the only person at that level of oversight that I can say that about with confidence." He looked at Calloway directly. "I need a way to reach her that doesn't go through any channel Pendleton has visibility on. And I need it in the next," he checked his watch, "4 hours." Calloway stood. He walked to the desk, opened his laptop, and typed something without explaining what it was. "Forsyth was at a conference in Portland yesterday," he said. "Infrastructure Security Symposium. My wife is on the board of the host organization." He looked up. "I can have her personal cell in 3 minutes without putting either of our names in a system." Sterling felt something shift in his chest, the first clean breath since he'd climbed through a window south of the city. "Do it." While Calloway made his calls, Sterling moved through the practical problem with the systematic focus that had defined his career. He needed 3 things in parallel: a secure way to reach Forsyth, a way to locate where Pendleton's people had taken Channing and Webb, and a way to present the evidence they had accumulated, the timeline document, the DIA records his contact had pulled, Webb's photographs, in a form that was legally coherent and immediately actionable. The evidence without Channing was still evidence. That was what she had understood when she wrote the note. She had built the case to survive her own absence. Calloway returned with a number written on a hotel notepad and slid it across the table. Sterling dialed from the room's landline. It rang 4 times, and then a woman's voice came on, not tentative, not soft, the voice of someone who answered unknown numbers the way a surgeon approaches unexpected complications, with focused, alert readiness. "This is Forsyth." "Margaret, it's Richard Sterling. I apologize for the manner of this call. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not ask me how I got this number." A very brief pause. "All right. I have evidence of a systematic program of sanctioned operations being deliberately compromised by a senior CIA official for the purpose of eliminating American assets with knowledge of unauthorized financial transfers connected to foreign intelligence interests. The program spans at least 5 years and 7 confirmed operations, with a combined potential casualty count in excess of 100. I have a survivor who has been building documentation for 5 years and who is currently in the custody of this official's people." He stopped. Let her process it. "I need to meet with you, in person, today, with what I have." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. "Who is the official?" she said. "Arthur Pendleton." The silence this time lasted 5 seconds. Then, "Are you somewhere safe right now?" "Relatively. Portland is 90 minutes from Seattle by air. I can be there by early evening." Her voice had shifted, not louder but more concentrated, like a beam of light narrowing to a point. "Admiral, I need you to understand something. If you are right about this, the moment I open an official inquiry, we have a clock. Pendleton will know. He has sources inside my office. I have suspected it for 2 years, but I have never had actionable evidence of what he was running. If he knows we're moving, he will move first." She paused. "The woman who is in his custody, is she someone who can survive being held for 12 to 18 hours while I put the right people in place?" Sterling thought about gray eyes in a measured voice and a woman who had crawled out of 8 feet of rubble with a fractured collarbone and 3 broken ribs. "Yes," he said, "but I want her out." "So do I," Forsyth said. "Give me everything you have in digital form to this address." She read out an encrypted email address he copied onto the notepad. "Within the next 2 hours, do not use any device registered to you. And Admiral, do not move from wherever you are until I confirm receipt." She ended the call. Sterling looked at the notepad in his hand. Calloway was watching him from across the room. "We need a clean device," Sterling said. Calloway opened his briefcase and produced a tablet still in its retail packaging. "Bought it 3 months ago for my grandson and never got around to sending it," he said. "Never been activated, never been on a network." He handed it over. "Welcome to retirement, Richard. We keep clean devices for exactly the situations we tell ourselves will never happen." Sterling almost smiled. Almost. They spent the next 90 minutes working. Calloway typed while Sterling dictated, translating 5 years of Channing's assembled evidence. The timeline, the DIA records summary that Sterling reconstructed from memory with the precision of a man who had been reading classified documents for 3 decades. The photographic evidence from Webb and Sterling's own first-hand account of the morning's events into a coherent, formal document. Calloway had been a flag officer. He knew how these documents needed to read. He knew the language that made reviewers take things seriously and the language that made them hesitate, and he used the former exclusively. When it was sent, Sterling sat back and looked at the clock. 2:47 in the afternoon. Forsyth would land around 5. Whatever Pendleton's people were doing with Channing, they had been doing it for 4 hours. He stood up. "I can't just sit here," he said. "I know," Calloway said, "but you will, because she told you not to be late, and she gave you a time, and that means she has a plan, and the plan requires you to be in one piece and on schedule." He looked at Sterling steadily. "Trust the woman who survived the unsurvivable, Richard. That seems like the correct play." Sterling sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table in front of him, and he breathed. And he did the thing that was the hardest thing he knew how to do, which was wait with purpose and without panic, holding the weight of what he couldn't control. He thought about Channing in the back of that vehicle, going willingly into the hands of the people who had tried to kill her twice already. And he thought about the note she had written before she even heard the knock on the door, because she had always known, that this moment would come, and she had prepared for it with the same cold precision she had applied to everything else. She was not going in blind. She was not going in unprepared. She had a plan that she had not told him because if he had known, he would have fought it, and she needed him out of the way to execute it. He didn't like that. He sat with it anyway. At 4:15, the burner phone he had left on Calloway's desk buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. 4 words. "Package confirmed. Move at 6. Calloway read it over his shoulder. "Forsyth?" "Has to be," Sterling said. "She confirmed receipt. 6 o'clock. He looked at the address on the piece of paper Channing had left him. An address in the industrial corridor south of the city, a warehouse district that would be empty at this hour of the evening. He looked at the time written below it, 6:15. She had known. She had built the timing into the note before she left. Calloway said very quietly, "Who is this woman?" Sterling folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. "Someone who should never have had to become what she became," he said. "But since she did, I'm grateful she's on our side." At 5:45, Sterling and Calloway were in Calloway's rental car, moving south on I-5, and Sterling had allowed himself to check in with the one part of his mind he had been keeping locked since that morning. The part that was afraid. Not afraid of Pendleton, not afraid of what was coming, but afraid of something smaller and more specific. Afraid that he had been found too late, that the 10 minutes he had spent sitting in a hospital examination room in a paper gown had cost something that couldn't be recovered, that Channing Harding had survived 5 years as a ghost, only to be taken apart in the last 12 hours because an old Admiral had fainted at a budget briefing and ended up at Seattle Presbyterian. He locked that part back up. It served no purpose. What served a purpose was arriving at 6:15. They arrived at 6:10. Calloway parked 2 blocks from the address and they walked. Because Channing's note had said come on foot, and Sterling was done second-guessing her instructions. The building was a converted light industrial facility, loading docks on the south face, a row of high windows along the upper wall, the kind of building that was empty enough on a Thursday evening to swallow sound. Sterling's training read the building the way it automatically read any space. Entry points, sight lines, choke points. He counted 3 vehicles parked in the lot, none of them the vehicle that had picked Channing up. He was 2 steps from the side entrance when the door opened from inside. Margaret Forsyth was 55, gray-haired, compact, and wearing an expression that Sterling recognized as the professional face of someone managing approximately 4 things simultaneously and succeeding at all of them. She had 2 people behind her who wore the controlled readiness of federal law enforcement and the particular haircut that went with it. "Admiral," she said, shaking his hand with the efficiency of someone for whom social ritual was a tool rather than a courtesy. "Everything you sent checked out against what I've been sitting on for 2 years. I have a federal warrant for Pendleton's communications records being executed as we speak by an attorney I trust with my life. We have a 4-hour window before anyone in his network knows it's happening." She paused. "We have a problem." Sterling looked at her. "Your witness," she said. "The woman, we can't find her. The vehicle she was taken in hasn't appeared on any traffic camera in the city for the last 3 hours. Pendleton's people are very good at this." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were not. She looked like she had been through something. Her scrub top was torn at the left shoulder. There was a bruise forming along her right jawline that hadn't been there that morning. But she was standing with both feet under her, and her eyes were fully alert, and she was holding a small black object in her right hand that Sterling recognized after a beat as a digital recorder. Marcus Webb was 3 steps behind her, pale and shaken, and very clearly alive. The room was completely silent for 3 full seconds. "How?" Sterling said. "I told you," she said, and she crossed the floor toward Forsyth with the recorder extended. "That the thumb drive wasn't the only copy." She put the recorder in Forsyth's hand. "Signal intercept recorder. I've been wearing it as a body device since year 3. Everything Pendleton's people said to me in the last 4 hours is on there, including the name of the person who ordered my team's transmission jammed 5 years ago, spoken out loud by a man who believed I was not going to be in a position to repeat it." She held Forsyth's gaze. "That's Pendleton's direct voice authorization for the operation, corroborated by his own operative. That's not circumstantial. That's a confession." Forsyth looked at the recorder in her hand. She looked at Channing. Something moved across her face that was not surprise, but was close to wonder. The expression of a lawyer who has been building a case on fragments for 2 years and has just been handed the keystone. "How did you get out?" one of the federal agents asked. Channing looked at him. "The same way I always get out," she said. "I waited until the moment they were certain I couldn't, and then I did." She turned and found Sterling in the room, and for a moment it was just the two of them in the middle of everything else. The agents, the lawyer, the recorder, the weight of the whole terrible 5-year arc of it, and Sterling looked at her face, at the bruise in the torn fabric, and the absolute unbroken steadiness in those gray eyes. And he said the only thing that was true and mattered. "I wasn't late," he said. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not exactly. Something quieter and more durable than a smile. "No," she said, "you weren't." Forsyth was already on her phone. Her voice was low and rapid and entirely in control. The two agents were moving. Calloway was standing to one side with his hands in his pockets and an expression that said he had seen many things in his career, and this was going to be one he did not forget. Webb sat down heavily in a folding chair near the wall and put his face in his hands. And Channing crossed to him and crouched down and put her hand on his arm and said something quiet that Sterling couldn't hear. Whatever it was, Webb raised his head and looked at her. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had spent 4 terrifying hours believing he had sent someone he cared about into something she would not come back from, and was now trying to adjust to the reality that he had been wrong. Sterling turned to the window. Outside, the city was moving into evening. Lights coming on, the ordinary pulse of ordinary life, people going home to dinners and television, and the uncomplicated geography of days that didn't include classified betrayals or drainage pipes or 5 years of living as a ghost. He thought about 22 names on a wall in Washington. He thought about the order he had signed. He thought about the moment tomorrow or the day after or the week after, whenever the wheels of the thing Forsyth was setting in motion finally ground down on Arthur Pendleton. When those names would mean something different than they had meant this morning. Not erased, not recovered, but true, finally, accounted for. Forsyth ended her call and looked at Sterling. "We're moving on Pendleton in the next 2 hours. He's in D.C. I need you on a plane tonight." Sterling nodded. "I'll need to contact my aide." "Already handled," Forsyth said. "Briggs has been secured. He's fine." She paused. "I need the survivor's testimony on record before we move. Tonight." Sterling looked at Channing. She was already standing, already upright, already looking at Forsyth with the focused readiness of a woman who had been preparing for this exact conversation for 5 years and was not going to need a moment to collect herself. "I'm ready," she said, and in her voice, flat, clear, carrying everything it needed to carry and nothing it didn't, was the sound of a door opening after a very long time in the dark. Pendleton, in his office in Langley at that precise moment, was reading an email from a field contact in Seattle that said the asset had been contained and the recording device found and destroyed. He leaned back in his chair. He allowed himself the same slow, satisfied smile he had allowed himself 5 years ago when he signed the airstrike authorization. He picked up his phone. He began to dial. He did not know that the recording device his people had found and destroyed was a decoy. A cheap digital recorder she had placed in her jacket pocket, knowing they would search her, knowing they would find it, knowing they would believe they had won. He did not know that the real device had been in the lining of her left shoe since she walked out of the safe house. He did not know that every word his operative had spoken in that room was already in the hands of the Inspector General of the intelligence community. He did not know that a federal warrant with his name on it was being executed at this moment across 3 continents. He was smiling when his phone rang. He answered it, and the smile was gone before the first sentence was finished. The phone call that ended Arthur Pendleton's smile lasted 47 seconds. Channing knew this because she was standing in the federal building in downtown Seattle when Forsyth's deputy read the intercept transcript aloud, and she counted the seconds the way she had counted everything for 5 years. Carefully, precisely, with the knowledge that details were the difference between surviving and not. 47 seconds. That was how long it took for a man who had spent 7 years believing himself untouchable to understand that the walls had already come down and he was standing in the rubble. The call had come from one of Pendleton's own network contacts, a mid-level CIA administrator named Doyle, who had been in the room when the warrants were executed and who, faced with the specific and unambiguous evidence now in Forsyth's possession, had made the decision that self-preservation outweighed loyalty within approximately 90 seconds of federal agents walking through his door. Doyle had called Pendleton from a monitored line, which was either the bravest or the most calculated thing he had ever done, and he had said 3 sentences. The ICIG has everything. Sterling is alive and cooperating. Harding is alive. 47 seconds of silence on Pendleton's end. Then the line went dead. Forsyth had Pendleton's passport flagged within 4 minutes of that call. She had a federal arrest warrant signed within 20. She had agents at Dulles, Reagan National, and BWI within 35. She was methodical and fast in the way of someone who had been waiting for exactly this situation and had rehearsed the sequence so many times in her mind that execution felt less like action and more like finally releasing something that had been held under pressure for too long. Channing sat in a hard chair in a conference room and gave her testimony for 3 hours and 40 minutes. She did not need notes. She did not need prompts. She spoke in chronological order, in complete sentences, with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing this testimony every day for 5 years. Not in anticipation of this specific room, not even in confidence that this day would come, but as an act of discipline, the way a prisoner marks the wall not because they know they'll be released, but because marking the wall is the only way to keep the days from dissolving into each other. Forsyth's deputy recorded it. A federal attorney took notes. Forsyth herself sat across the table and listened with her hands folded and her eyes steady. And twice she stopped Channing to ask a clarifying question. The kind of question that told Channing she was being heard by someone who understood exactly what she was saying and exactly what it meant. Sterling was in an adjacent room giving his own account. They had been separated by Forsyth before the testimony began. Standard procedure, she had explained, to ensure independent corroboration, and Channing had accepted this without argument. She didn't need Sterling in the room to tell her story. She had never needed anyone in the room to tell her story. What she felt in that conference room chair, under the fluorescent light, with the recorder running and Forsyth's deputy's pen moving across the page, what she felt was not relief, not yet, and not triumph, which had always seemed like the wrong word for what the end of something like this should feel like. What she felt was something more structural than either of those things. The particular sensation of a weight that has been carried so long, the body has forgotten what it feels like without it beginning, for the first time, to shift. When it was done, Forsyth walked her out of the conference room and into the corridor and said, very simply, "You did well." Channing looked at her. "Is it enough?" Forsyth held her gaze without flinching. Combined with Sterling's testimony, the DIA records, the communications intercept from your recording device, Doyle's cooperation, and 2 years of anomalous activity flags from my own office that I was never able to connect to a source until tonight? She paused. "Yes, it's enough." Channing nodded once. She breathed. "I need to ask you something," Forsyth said, "and I need an honest answer." "All right. The other operations, the other teams, you said in your testimony you believe there may be survivors from other compromised missions." She kept her voice level and professional, but underneath it was something that wasn't professional at all, the human weight of what she was asking. "Do you have any specific reason to believe that, or is it inference from the pattern?" Channing was quiet for a moment. 2 years ago, she said carefully, I received an anonymous message through a dead-drop email address that I had set up in year 1 as a way for anyone who knew my old identity to reach me. It was 3 words. She paused. "Not all ghosts." Forsyth went very still. "I never replied," Channing said. "I didn't know if it was genuine or a trap. I couldn't risk it." She met Forsyth's eyes. "Find them. Whatever resources this investigation opens up, find them." Forsyth held her gaze for 3 seconds. "That is a promise," she said. At 9:47 that evening, Arthur Pendleton was taken into federal custody at his home in McLean, Virginia. He did not go quietly, not in the sense of resistance, he was smart enough not to resist, but in the sense that he did not go with the dignified resignation that men in his position sometimes affected, the performance of a man who accepted the consequences of his choices with a kind of tragic nobility. Pendleton went the way he had lived, calculating, self-protective, immediately asking for his attorney and saying nothing else. His face, according to the agent who led the arrest, showed no remorse, only the hard, contained fury of a man whose plan had failed. Channing was told about the arrest at 10:12. She was sitting alone in the conference room by then, the testimony finished. Forsyth's team working through the night in adjacent rooms, the building humming with the contained urgency of a major federal operation in its first hours. Sterling had come through after his own session ended and sat across from her with 2 cups of bad coffee from the break room down the hall. And they had sat together in a silence that didn't require anything from either of them, which was its own kind of luxury after the day they'd had. When the deputy came in and told her, she set down the coffee cup. She looked at her hands on the table. She thought about 22 people whose names she knew better than she knew most of the people currently alive in her life. Their voices, their specific laughs, the ways they complained about the food and the weather and the bureaucratic absurdities of the institution they had all chosen to serve. She thought about the drainage pipe. She thought about 4 hours under rubble with a fractured collarbone, listening to the silence where the radio response should have been. She didn't cry. That wasn't a performance of strength. It was simply that she had done most of that grieving in the dark, alone, over 5 years, in the way that people grieve when there is no one to grieve with and no permission to stop functioning. What she felt now was different. It was the particular stillness that comes at the end of a very long fight, when the body finally receives the signal that it can stand down. Sterling was watching her. "You okay?" he asked. She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Not yet," she said, "but I think I will be." He nodded slowly. "That's the most honest answer anyone has ever given me to that question." She almost smiled. "I've been practicing honesty," she said. "It turns out it's easier when you're not dead." He made the sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. She had decided she liked it. Forsyth came in at 11:30 with the expression of someone who had just cleared one mountain and could see the range that followed. She sat across from them both and put a tablet on the table with a document on it and slid it toward Channing. "Pendleton's network is larger than either of us anticipated," she said. "We have 3 additional arrests tonight, 2 in Langley, 1 in Brussels. The Belgian connection is significant. It confirms the foreign intelligence link you documented in your timeline." She paused. "This is going to take months to fully unwind, possibly years, and I need to be direct with you about what that means for both of you." Channing and Sterling waited. "You will be called to testify before a Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee, possibly more than once. The proceedings will involve classified information, which means your participation will require certain protections." Forsyth looked at Channing specifically. "Your identity situation, Channing Moore, the name you've been living under, that becomes complicated in the context of official proceedings. We're going to need to address that with the appropriate clearances and legal framework." "She means," Sterling said carefully, watching Channing's face, "that Channing Harding is going to have to come back." The room was quiet. Channing looked at the table. She thought about the woman named Channing Moore, the 3 years at Seattle Presbyterian, the routine she had built, the colleagues who knew her by a name that was not hers, the life she had constructed with the specific purpose of surviving long enough to reach this moment. She thought about what it meant to lay that down, not with grief exactly, but with the particular complexity of putting away something that had kept you alive. "What happens to my colleagues at the hospital?" she asked. "Webb. The others who don't know anything about any of this, are they protected?" "We have people with Webb tonight," Forsyth said. "He'll be briefed to a limited extent tomorrow. He's not in danger. Pendleton's network is in collapse, and the priority at this point is preservation of evidence, not elimination of witnesses. That threat calculus has shifted significantly in the last 6 hours." She paused. "Your colleagues who know nothing are not at risk." Channing nodded. "And Teresa Garza," she said, "the JAG paralegal, the woman who was in the car accident." Forsyth looked at her deputy, who made a note. "We'll reach out tomorrow," she said. "She'll be contacted carefully." "She doesn't know why it happened," Channing said. "She's been living with that for 4 years. She deserves to know." "She will," Forsyth said, and the way she said it was the way she had said everything that mattered tonight, directly, without qualification, with the weight of someone who understood that these were not procedural loose ends, but human beings whose lives have been broken by the same man, and who were owed the truth. At 12:40 in the morning, Forsyth's deputy knocked on the door and said that a vehicle was available to take both of them wherever they needed to go. Sterling stood first. He buttoned his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who had been putting on a uniform for 35 years, and would probably be putting it on until they took it from him. And he looked at Channing with an expression that had in it more than the events of a single day could fully account for. The weight of 5 years of carrying 23 names, the specific relief of one of those names being wrong, and the beginning of something that had not been there this morning. The forward-looking, effortful thing that a person builds after they have finally dealt with what has been standing in the way of it. "I owe you something," he said. She looked up at him. "You don't." "I do, and I intend to pay it." He held her gaze. "I'm going to go back to Washington, and I'm going to be in that committee room when this comes to hearings, and I am going to say every single thing that needs to be said with my name and my rank attached to it. No qualifications, no institutional hedging, everything." He paused. "And when it's over, when the proceedings are done and the record is corrected, I'm going to make sure that 22 names on a wall in Washington have a second line under them that tells the truth about what happened and who they were." Channing looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face, complicated and real and not entirely controlled, the kind of thing that surfaces when a person has been holding something compressed for so long that the first genuine release of pressure feels almost like pain. "They deserved better than what they got," she said. "Yes," he said, "they did, and so did you." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She stood and they walked out of the conference room together. In the federal building at 1 in the morning was the specific quiet of a place where important work was continuing without pause. People moving through corridors with purpose in files, and the low-voiced intensity of a major case in its first critical hours. Nobody looked at them. Nobody stopped them. They walked through it and out into the night air, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk with the city humming around them. Sterling's aide Briggs was waiting beside a government vehicle, visibly relieved in the way of a young officer who has spent a day being told very little and imagining a great deal. He opened the door without a word. Sterling looked at Channing. "Where are you going to go?" She thought about it. It was a real question. The first time in 5 years that the answer to it was not constrained by the need to disappear. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the first time I've been able to say that." "Is that good or bad?" She considered it genuinely. "It's new," she said. "I'll figure it out." He nodded, held out his hand. She shook it, not the formal handshake of officers, but the handshake of two people who had been through something together that neither of them would ever fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. "Harding," he said. "Sterling," she said. He got in the vehicle. It pulled away. Channing stood alone on the sidewalk and looked at the street. A cab was coming. A few other people were moving on the pavement, late workers, night shift people, the ordinary city at 1 in the morning doing what the ordinary city does. Nobody knew what had happened today. Nobody walking past her understood that the name Arthur Pendleton, which would be on every front page within 48 hours, had been brought to the moment of its ending in part by a woman standing alone on a sidewalk in Seattle, in a torn scrub top with a bruise on her jaw, and no phone, and no car, and no plan for the next 12 hours beyond the one she was about to make up. She put her hand in her pocket, felt the piece of paper that wasn't there anymore, the note she had written, the one Sterling had taken. 4 lines, a name, an address, a time. Don't be late. She thought about the team, not as a monument, not as an obligation, but as themselves, the specific, irreplaceable, infuriating, beloved human beings they had been before Pendleton had decided they were a liability. She thought about them the way she had not allowed herself to think about them in a very long time, with something other than grief, with the memory of who they actually were. She thought about the message in the dead drop account, not all ghosts. She flagged the cab. Inside, the driver asked where she was going. She gave him an address, not the safe house, not the hospital, not any of the places that belonged to Channing Moore or Channing Harding or any of the versions of herself she had built and shed in the last 5 years. She gave him the address of a hotel downtown, a room she could pay for in cash, a night she could spend in the simple, unfamiliar luxury of not having to be anywhere before morning. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and depositions and the long, complicated machinery of federal justice working its way through the wreckage of 7 years of Arthur Pendleton's choices. Tomorrow there would be phone calls and arrangements, and the particular difficulty of reconstructing a legal identity for a woman the government had declared dead. Tomorrow there would be questions she didn't have answers to yet, about what Channing Harding did next, about who she was when she wasn't surviving, about what a life looked like when it was no longer organized entirely around a single necessary purpose. Tomorrow there would also be a search for survivors, for whoever had sent 3 words into a dead drop account 2 years ago and waited in the dark for an answer that never came. She was going to find them. She had promised Forsyth. More than that, she had promised herself, and the promises she had made to herself were the only ones that had kept her breathing for 5 years, and she did not intend to stop keeping them now. The cab moved through the city, and she looked out the window at the passing lights, and she thought about the moment in the examination room, the paper gown, the blood pressure cuff, the Admiral's hand closing around her wrist, and his voice saying the name she had buried. And she thought about how close she had come, every single day for 5 years, to not reaching this night. Every morning she had woken up in the life of Channing Moore and calculated the risk of the day and made the decision to continue. The small, deliberate, uncelebrated decision that nobody saw and nobody knew about, the decision to still be here. She was still here. 22 names on a wall in Washington were going to mean what they were supposed to mean. The man who had silenced their transmissions, who had sat in a command center and watched the strike authorization cross a good man's desk and said nothing, who had spent 7 years walking through the world as though those 22 people had simply been the cost of doing business. That man was in federal custody, and the evidence that would follow him into every room he entered for the rest of his life was already in the hands of people who would not let it be buried. She had crawled out of 8 feet of rubble with a fractured collarbone and 3 broken ribs, and she had carried 22 names on her back for 5 years through a life that was not her own, and she had built the case alone in the dark, with no guarantee that anyone would ever believe it or act on it, or that she would live to see it matter. It mattered. The cab stopped. She paid. She got out. Channing Harding walked through the hotel doors, and for the first time in 5 years, she was not running, not hiding, not calculating the distance to the nearest exit. She was simply a woman walking into a room, carrying nothing except the truth she had refused to let die. And that truth tonight had finally become louder than everything that had tried to silence it. She had been a ghost long enough. She was done being dead.